Thanks for joining us for another edition of Biotech and Life Sciences CEOs. Today, I'm really excited to have Charles Gellman, CEO of HiDO Health, with us. HiDO is a company that's focused on using AI to help patients manage their medications for chronic disease. Each year, almost 250,000 people in America die as a result of medical errors associated with lack of adherence to a prescription schedule. That makes that the third largest cause of death in the US. Charles holds a master's degree in clinical informatics from UC Davis, where he currently volunteers as an adjunct professor, as well as an MBA from West Texas A&M. Charles, so many founders I've found in life sciences started out because of some personal connection or event, some life event that causes them to think about a need that in many cases they didn't even know existed prior to that event. Can you tell us about what happened to you?
Yeah, so like other folks, I had a event that changed the trajectory of my health and my career. And that happened by, going to the physician, and I was relatively young at the time in my early 20s, and I thought I had a kidney stone because we had a family history. My father's had kidney stones in the past, went there and then was diagnosed with a kidney stone, but it was actually appendicitis. So I had ruptured appendicitis and I was going into septic shock. And by having that experience, I was in the ICU for a couple of weeks after they did surgery. And that really changed the course of my career from investment banking, following the path of my brother, to healthcare. And that changed everything, what I studied, how I felt, how I was learning about the industry. I was exceptionally naive when I first entered healthcare, didn't understand the delivery mechanisms, the communications, the terminology, pretty much everything, just starting 100% green.
So you at the time, I think, were in, or at some point early on, medical device sales for a major pharma, and you flipped that and became a founder. And what was that transition like?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to start my career with Johnson and Johnson, and they have exceptionally well run business operations. So I was able to learn and train with the best of the best, and really get that base knowledge and foundation that I didn't have from my previous undergraduate education, and that set me up, I believe, for a foundation of excellence going forward in my career. So I spent some time in pharma, spent some time in device, and also spent time in medical software. So that really gave me a different type of vantage point, not just at isolated locations within a specified region, but globally throughout the entire United States, different executive leaderships, different health systems, and really getting a vantage point that I believe is pretty unique versus, how people usually are kind of segmented to a specific geolocation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think those various careers has helped you as a CEO?
Absolutely, because I've seen different types of management practices in different types of organizations, some that I'd like to emulate myself, and I do, and I feel like you have a bit of that through osmosis, and others that I would, you know, like to avoid, and I've seen, ways that I like to be managed myself, and I've seen other people not particularly like that. So it's really being able to cater to the unique personalities of your team and get the most out of folks, and what they have to offer. And everyone's different, everyone has strengths and weaknesses, but putting together a team of folks that can complement each other and balancing that is, it's a monumental task for a lot of managers.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about some of the problems with the current method, or maybe better said, lack of method under which patients currently take their medications. What problems do you see there?
Yeah, so it's a pretty interesting dynamic right now if you really look within the home. So that really is a black hole. And what I mean a black hole is that nobody really understands exactly what's going on. If you look in the hospital or you look in the ambulatory clinic, that's a sterile environment where you have physicians, nurses, pharmacists. They're supporting patient success. But the second they leave, the onus is on the patient. And these patients aren't medically trained. Some people can, I consider they're DIYers. So they're able to do it yourself. But the majority of the folks, they have, complications, or they have obstacles and challenges that are unforeseen or unknown, and that makes things very problematic. So you look in a lot of the clinical studies and the journals, and non-adherence could be 30 to 50%, but nobody really knows because nobody's physically observing the behaviors that are happening in the home. And that's where things get very interesting, because medicines are only as good as the medications actually taken. And that's where I believe there could be a huge shift in the marketplace in the well-being and the health of many folks, not just within the United States, but around the world.
And two, it's about effectiveness, because if the drug is purchased but never used, it gives the wrong signal. It tells the seller of the medicine that, in fact, it was ineffective, when in fact it was the patient that was ineffective in taking the medicine.
Yeah, and I think that's where things become pretty interesting, because there's always that discussion around the cost of medications, and that usually is a hot button item within the news. But I believe it goes both ways. The cost of medication is one, and that's from an access standpoint. But the majority of Americans do have some type of health plan coverage and insurance, and it's not to say that cost isn't an issue for some folks, but if they do have access to the medications, and folks are challenged with taking the medications, that's an exceptionally unfortunate opportunity that we have right in front of us. When medications are there, they're just not taken as intended. So you're not reflecting what people are seeing within the clinical trials. And that's a shame. I think that can be solved now, and that can impact millions of folks now. And we can actually lower the cost of care substantially if we can solve that.
So I'm always interested in how a founder thinks about a problem, how that problem develops sort of in his mind, and then he pursues a solution. How did you, after the appendectomy, and you began to think about lack of adherence as an issue, how did you think about that? How did you sort of go through the various permutations of that problem?
Yeah, so I think it was an evolution. So I was able to think about it in bits based upon my experiences at all the different companies. So I was able to speak firsthand with providers of different subspecialties and see the variability in practice from one provider to another. So there wasn't that standard. In addition to that, based upon the clinical studies, which we kind of discussed, and the results of patient populations, there's always seemed to be some type of variability. And I couldn't really put my head around it until later, when I started to look into the marketplace, connecting the dots from a data science standpoint. And when you look at from a data science standpoint, you say, okay, you have somebody with a chronic disease, you have age, gender, race, and other demographics. And it all comes down to, basically three pillars of health. One is exercise and mobility. Two is diet and, nutrition. And three is medications. But if the first two they're having challenges with, the third they're having challenges with too, but we're not addressing that. And that's where things get pretty interesting, because if you think about it, if most of the people are relying on medications to stabilize their disease states, then we probably should have a good understanding of if they're taking their medications, because prescribers are responding with higher titrations and more medications based upon the communication they get from the patient. But if we know it's not a reliable source of information, then, garbage in, garbage out. That's what you're going to get.
Right. So let's talk about HiDO and how it works, how you developed it, how it works, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. So HiDO stands for Health Information Data Outcomes, and it also means covered in Japanese. We had zero intent to create HiDO because I figured somebody else created it 15 or 20 years before we even looked at the problem. And the reason why we were looking into the medication monitoring of patients is because in order to create the blueprint for health, you have to know unequivocally from a data science perspective whether or not people are taking the medications as intended. Otherwise, you can't correlate the cocktails of medications with the lab work, with the final outcomes, which is hospitalizations, ER admissions, or staying at home. So there's a closed ecosystem and a flywheel effect that happens. But in order to do that, you got to have good data going in. So we started looking at the marketplace and looking at different vendors, and we ordered the units, started testing them. And what we started to figure out very quickly is that they're not patient friendly. They actually increase the burden on the end user to utilize their product. Therefore, people don't utilize their product. So we had to go to the drawing board. And I'm not sure if you see my handwriting, but it looks like hieroglyphics. So I drafted out what we needed. Had some engineers render what it would actually look like. And we started talking to the patients. What do we need to create in order to elicit behavioral modification that needs to occur to get people to take their medications as intended for the first time? And so we really backtracked from the end in mind, then built up so we could automate the experience for the end user so they didn't have to lift a finger. So what HiDO does, it's an AI assisted robotic device where a patient can walk up, use Face ID, unlock the unit. So it's the right person, the right medication, the right frequency, the right dosage, and the right count. Then they physically take their medications in front of the unit, and it has recording. So you have data integrity on the back end for clinicians or people in pop health or other folks in data science to know that the data integrity exists for the first time ever.
And as well, the patient doesn't have to count the pills, right?
Yes, we automate the entire experience for the patient for a reason. So think of like a Keurig coffee device in the ring having a baby. That's the HiDO. So the patient simply puts the pill cup, or I'm sorry, the pill bottle within the device, and the HiDO unit auto recognizes medication dosage, frequency, and pill count. So we've removed that burden on the end user. And the idea behind this is to drastically reduce the unknowns. And that is the amount of medication errors that happen at home right now, every day, that nobody's tracking.
How does it recognize that dosage and that sort of thing? Is it reading the script?
Yeah, so we have patented technology for any of the electronic transmission that happens between the device and the pill cup. Right now, we do it through embedded RFID, but there's a variety of different other electronic technologies that can transfer that information back and forth.
I understand that as you got started, you had an interesting impromptu conversation at a dinner party that kind of really set the wheels in motion. Tell us about that.
Well, there's, when I first initially started, I was at a dinner party where it was a New Year's Eve party, and people were talking about their ideas in front of a broader group of folks. And I was the last one to go up to talk about my idea. And there was other folks in there that were within the healthcare industry, which was pretty interesting. And once I started talking about it publicly, it's interesting. So you almost get like gravitas behind the idea, and people come together as one to start moving the ball forward. And at the time, I didn't really know exactly what was happening, but I believe in the power of your message. If you let people know about what you're doing and you have good intentions and people want to make an impact, people will come together as one to push things forward. So I started talking to people about what we were thinking about, and I was able to start recruiting a team of very unique individuals with skill sets that I don't have, because I'm not an engineer. I lack a lot of skill sets, but there's some fantastic like-minded individuals that really want to make an impact. So I believe that just started the momentum, and that was a wonderful experience.
So one of the great things about the product, I think, is that it impacts not only the patient, but the family. Because being a caregiver can be really stressful, very debilitating, particularly with Alzheimer's and dementia. I have a personal experience with a friend, client, who was a caregiver for a husband for many years as he went through Alzheimer's, and he finally passed away. And it wasn't 6 months before she was diagnosed as well. It's just very debilitating for the caregiver, and I think that the HiDO will take a lot of stress from those caregivers.
Yeah. Well, Tim, are you familiar with how many caregivers there are in the United States?
I'm not.
Take a guess. I want you and your audience to really think about how many folks right now do you think are supporting friends, family, and loved ones?
Oh gosh, we extend it to loved ones and all that sort of thing. 10 million.
Over 40 million people just in the United States alone.
I might be high. Wow. And when you add in the patients, why, you might be talking about 30% of the population of the US.
Yeah, it's very significant. So if you really truly think about the underlying issues, folks at home with little assistance are having to follow complicated regimens with chronic disease that may be cognitively impaired. So what is the likelihood of success for those patients at home with little to no assistance?
Yeah. Almost zero.
It's very challenging for a lot of folks. So really the idea behind HiDO is to provide AI-assisted robotics to the folks that need a helping hand without being cost prohibitive.
What about IP, Charles?
Yeah, so we do have IP that was filed, and we have it was approved in regards to the system design and architecture, and we have other IP within our portfolio that's pending.
Now, will you apply for a utility as well, or?
We already have the IP approved for system design and architecture.
Okay. Seems like a good time to talk about value-based care, because HiDO seems to me, non-scientist, okay, but very much to fit the mold. And we talk generally about value-based care and how it might be beneficial, but how is it going to happen? Well, you can see how it's going to happen. It's called Medicare Advantage. That's where the government is pushing us, subtly, without telling us, but that's where it's going. And HiDO seems to be a good partner in that quest.
Yeah, we've had some experience with Medicare Advantage plans. We started with a pilot in Northern California, and it was a small subset, 30 total, and we ended up going live on about 15 patients with heart failure. And these folks with heart failure, you have an opportunity to actually do a thing called heart remodeling. So you can improve the function of the heart, but you got to take the medications. And the unknown of these patients was what happened prior to the HiDO intervention. So most of the folks that were enrolled in the study, they had previous hospitalizations and ER visits, 2+ hospitalizations and a variety of different emergency room visits. And after going on the HiDO device, very shortly after, what we measured was the blood work. So we could measure if they had improvements in their A1Cs, which is diabetes related, but more importantly, the BNPs, which is what is your risk of what is your heart failure, or what's your cardiovascular risk, and is it actually decreasing based upon your medications? And we had a 3x reduction in BNPs, and we had multiple point drops in their glucose levels just by implementing the HiDO device. But more importantly, we had 80% reduction in hospitalizations. So just really think about the impact. We got $1.2 trillion spent on hospital visits a year right now. How many of those are actually necessary visits versus patients going in because they're simply not controlled with their medications?
So what you found were these patients which had experienced many hospitalizations prior to going through the experience of HiDO were difficult patients. It wasn't just their health. They were difficult patients. They weren't able to do what was necessary in order to limit, the risk.
Yeah, and people struggle. They have mental health issues. They live independently. If you don't have a loved one, you don't have a caregiver, you don't have a friend at home, those folks are 6 times more likely to go to the hospital. So
Right.
there's, if you're looking at leveling the playing field from a health equity standpoint,
Right.
then you need to be able to have a technology in there that's able to deliver things in a way to raise the level of playing field for everybody versus having disparities all across the board. Because when you start to accentuate variable on top of variable on top of variable, it's just a probability of when it's going to happen.
Right. Right. So who do you sell to? The insurance company, the hospital, both? What's going to happen there?
Yeah, so right now we're specifically focused on Medicare Advantage plans because the cost of savings is substantial. So if we can reduce hospitalizations and ER visits, what we've seen is a 67% decrease in the cost of care for these patients, which is significant because the health plan has the ability now to lower their health spend. 1% of their population is accounting for about 40% of their total medical spend. So if they have the ability to impact these populations, then not only can they decrease the cost of care for these patients, they take better care remotely so they don't have to be impacted with these types of unnecessary hospitalizations or ER visits. But then they also have the potential to lower their premiums and expand out and grow faster in the marketplace because their money's not tied up in areas where I believe that can be deferred in other alternative arrangements or potentially, improving the type of treatments that they could do for a wider population because monies can be spent elsewhere.
So what's the biggest pushback from those Medicare Advantage plans? Is it perhaps no really large study?
Yeah, I think it depends on the Medicare Advantage plan, but right now we're scaling out pretty quickly. And my belief is that, as we continue to push forward and people understand what we're doing, I don't think there's going to be much of a pushback because the alternative is we can continue to do more of the same and you'll get more of the same. Or we can try something different that we know that works. And then it's a question of how do we make it work with larger populations? And that's just a workflow and processes problem to solve.
So the Medicare Advantage owns the product. Is that right? And they place it in the patient's home.
Yeah, they actually lease the HiDO devices because it's a device subscription and software application where we service it. Now, we can either deploy the device in the home, or if they already have a home health agency or it's part of their structure, then they could go and deploy it and set it up. It just depends upon the model.
Okay. Can a husband and wife use the same HiDO, or do they need two?
Yeah, so that's also a great question. So we look at it like this. Most folks have their own phone and people don't like to share.
Okay.
Now, it's not to say that in the future, could we do multiple IDs for the same device? Yes, but typically from what we've seen, most want their own device. So what we've done is we've deployed husband and wife devices in the home. They both have separate units with their separate medications.
Okay. And is there a limitation on the number of pill bottles that can be put into one HiDO?
Yes. Yeah. Right now we're
taking, 20 pills.
Right? Yeah. So if you're a kidney transplant patient and you're on 20 to 25 medications, the HiDO device is not for you. What we're looking at is your chronic care disease patients, folks that have cardiovascular disease, underlying diabetes, they might have, dementia, Alzheimer's, or other type of, chronic diseases that need those regular regimented medications in order to stay out of the hospital or the ER. So what we do is 7 medications in a 40-dram container, and that typically holds about 90 days of meds. Now, these are your have to have meds, not your nice to have. So if you're taking a omega-3 supplement or you're taking vitamin C, that's fantastic. But our medications, our device are, the most important medications to keep you out of, the facilities.
Are there regulatory issues that you're dealing with?
So HiDO device is a class 1 510K exempt device. It is an assisted technology.
Are there any competitors beyond, just DIY, as you say?
Yeah, well, I was just about to push back and say, well, the competitors are do nothing,
Right.
which is, we already know what the result of that is. And I think that there's a variety of different other technologies that are intriguing based upon the patient lift. So, you can still go get your medications and take them out of a pill bottle, and that might work for some. And then I think there's layers of technology. There's phone apps that'll remind you. But what we see as, a really good fit for the HiDO device are the ones that actually need the assisted robotics. And from my perspective, is that we believe that we can help those folks out quite a bit.
Particularly, I would think dementia, Alzheimer's, especially as people like Biogen and that sort of thing try and turn that injection into a small molecule.
Yes, I think that is very promising, because if you think about the molecules that are being developed with dementia and Alzheimer's, they're only as good as the folks that are taking their medications. So right now, the injectables are that's fantastic, but it will start to slowly evolve into a small molecule where patients are going to be dependent on taking their medications. And what's interesting is right now we're doing a study, an NIH-funded study with Rush University in Chicago, where we're doing dementia research, and it's up to 15 dyads. And right now we're up to 12 right now. And this is very fascinating. Each one of the dyads, the patient goes up to the unit unassisted with no directions to the HiDO device. They're able to set it up, take the medications, and put it down. And then we continue to have a conversation. And then they're able to do it again. And we're measuring that every time. So think of the implications of patients with dementia able to help themselves unassisted with a robotic device living at home.
Particularly because in Alzheimer's and many other new medications, the cost of the medication itself is so high that leaving it sitting in a pill bottle doesn't make a lot of sense for the patient or the system. How much do you think you can save, getting back to the value-based?
Mm-hmm.
Have you given an insurance company a number that is per participant on average they have these various diseases, you can save this amount of money?
Yeah, so we've already validated a 67% decrease in the cost of care for patients. I think globally, what would be within a range would be 30 to 50%. So one of our advisors is the former chief health plan administrator for CalPERS, and they manage roughly $10 billion a year. And her projections are within the 30 to 50%. And I believe that those are exceptionally high. I was, I'm a little bit conservative in my numbers, and I didn't think that that's something that we could achieve, but we've done better than that. And that speaks of either how large of an issue this really is, or there's a combination of factors of the issue is larger than anybody anticipated, and we have the technology to help create a solution that's going to impact it more than we ever, hypothesized that was possible.
What's the sales process going to be for you, Charles? How many salesmen do you look to hire? Who are their first calls? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it really depends upon, the verticals that we're addressing and going after. From a sales aspect, the way I see it is that we're having a lot of inbound right now. And as people start to uncover and discover what we're doing, we'll just see, where that goes and what resources we need in order to accomplish that.
Okay. Okay. Give us some success stories, Charles. Tell us about,
Yes.
you
Or
know,
go.
some of the people that you've tried the product with.
Yeah. So what's interesting is we've actually uncovered a variety of different successes, and they were not planned. So these
Okay.
are patient testimonials that we have on our YouTube site that people can look up if you look up HiDO Health. Um, but when we were first developing this, the most important thing is stress testing to see what is possible, because we all have our self-limiting doubts of what is possible, but that's not a good thing to hold back a product because we believe it's not going to work. So we had a couple of opportunities. One is with dementia, and that is the reason why we even started this NIH funded research. And her name is Gloria. She is the mother-in-law of a person I know. And she came to us because they were looking for something to help her take her medications at home. And she knew that we created the AI assisted robotic device, but I was hesitant to give her the device because I was unsure that it would work, which most people would think. Somebody has got cognitive impairment, they are diagnosed with dementia. How are they going to take their medications according to this regimen and understand to do this on their own? So, long story short, is Gloria is able to walk up to the unit, unlock the device, take her medications while her mother-in-law, I'm sorry, her daughter-in-law and her son were gone at dinner. And they called me because they were absolutely shocked that when they came home from dinner, it said, congratulations on the device, that she took her medications. And we were all shocked because it's a shocking discovery to understand that somebody that was fully dependent on their caregivers is no longer fully dependent on their caregivers for something like this. So that independence and freedom that exists and the sense of relief from those caregivers so substantial that it really pushed us to the brink of what if there is something out there that can truly impact millions of people and we can't hold ourselves back, and let's just see what happens. And so I think that's a fantastic testimony of what is possible. And I would ask anybody that's listening to the podcast to go to our YouTube channel and to look up HiDO Health so you can watch Gloria's story.
And it must have made Gloria feel almost victorious, at least for a minute or two, to know that she had done something herself, which she had been relying on her daughter-in-law for.
Well, what was interesting with Gloria is that she knew that I was on the other side. So because she knew I was on their side, she would get dressed up, she would put makeup on, she would talk to me, and then I would talk to her back.
Mhm.
So what's unique about the HiDO device is that because they know they're building a relationship with somebody on the other end, most of these folks, they don't see anybody outside of the home. There's nobody there. There's nobody to communicate with. So it gives them another, they know that somebody else is watching, and that means a lot. That impacts their lives. So it means a lot to us at HiDO to know that we're touching patients, but it also means a lot to them that somebody cares for them.
Yeah, yeah. And that really was one of the reasons I asked the question, Charles, because I watched the video in preparation for this interview. And the thing that touched me the most wasn't just Gloria's success at taking her meds. It was you sitting at the kitchen table because you cared more about Gloria than you did about making a buck. And I found in my limited experience with life sciences founders that that's always true. Always. It may not be true once the product or the business is sold to J&J and the suits take over. But all the time before that, as the product's being developed and the really hard work is done, the founders care about the patients. The money comes later.
Yeah, we are 100% impact focused on the patients. And I learned through their experiences and the product development, everything. I always say this to everybody. This is patient driven and patient developed. We just listened. And the HiDO device is a culmination of all of these discussions and experiences. I go into these homes. I know these people. I know the people that have passed away. You know, we've deployed on patients that had terminal cancer that nobody told me about till later. And you know, it's impact, you know, it has a, you know, substantial impact on those families' lives, all of these chronic diseases. So, but we can make things easier for them. They don't have to suffer.
Is there a group of companies, interests that would prefer not to see HiDO succeed? Does that exist?
Yeah, I can't comment on that. I think that if you look at, I'm sorry, what?
Who does it hurt in the system, though? What general group does it hurt, if any?
Well, what I would say is that with the HiDO device, you're able to determine which medications would have the best outcomes based upon specific regimens or specific cocktails of medications for disease states. So if you start looking at the blueprint for health from a value-based care perspective, I believe that health plans, providers, hospitals, and patients all want to know what's best for them. Some people win. There's always winners and losers. And, you know, so it just really depends upon what those cocktails and medications work best and what outcomes are the best based upon those parameters and variables.
How long before you try and attack the clinical trials market?
Well, our initial go-to-market strategy was clinical trials, but when I went to several meetings, you know, it's very challenging to have clinical research organizations and pharmaceutical companies pre-data at that time, was several years ago, you know, go out on with a new technology to really disrupt their data flow. But as I see it now, you know, we have data to prove out and validate what's possible. A lot of the unknowns that exist from a patient, you know, communication standpoint, they don't need to exist any longer. So when you start looking at the data science and analysis, 80% of their time is utilized collecting the data where we have real-time data, real-time engagement. So you start thinking about accelerating drug development and having good data. That is the reason why we created the HiDO device, to accelerate the type of drugs to market so they can have a substantial impact on patients like Gloria and other folks, other friends and loved ones across the country and potentially around the world.
So really, you're in a position to have a positive impact on both drug development and drug access, ultimately with the patient, which can have a tremendous impact as well on cost. And that's what we're all worried about, because if we get the cost down, we can improve access and we can make it more equitable. So you're really at the forefront of everything that's important in healthcare and budgeting. So I very much appreciate your time spent with us today, Charles. I think it's a great product. I am shocked that no one has yet previously developed it, because it seems like an obvious need, and certainly you've come up with a great solution.
Yeah, thank you so much for, you know, having me on. I appreciate it. And, you know, I truly believe that we can alter the future of care together. And we are looking for those partnerships in order to impact as many patients' lives as possible.
Well, good luck, Charles.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.